So we're back with another stream, Grandmaster's Choice, and today's theme is going to be prophylaxis and dynamics. So prophylaxis is often thought about as something positional, and I don't know if everyone knows what prophylaxis means, but the idea is generally to prevent your opponent's ideas. So it's a complicated idea, I would say, and it's mostly undervalued, but I would like to give some examples from my practice to sort of give some ideas of how you can prevent your opponent's play while improving your position. It's very underrated ability, but I think it's essential when you want to win some games. We should always remember that chess is a two-player game, and it's not only us who is playing, and our opponents always want to do something at the same time. So let's start with a first example. This is my game against Alexander Donchenko. It was played in 2009, so that was in the World Youth. It's quite an old game. I was 11 years old at that time, so it's an old game, but this definitely is one of the important games I played on this topic. So let's get started. E4, D6, D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, G6, H3. So the reason I was playing this line with H3 was actually quite straightforward. The most common moves include the simplest Knight to F3, but for some reason I wanted to prevent my opponent from playing Bishop G4 and taking the knight. So I started applying this prophylaxis concept very early on in the game. It's of course not necessarily the best line, but I just want to give you a feel of what it means. And in this position, for example, after I played Knight F3, my opponent can no longer play Bishop G4. Once again, you're not necessarily supposed to stop every single move of your opponent, but just to get an idea of how it works, let's try to start it off from the very beginning of the game, just so that we get a good sense of how things work. Bishop G7, Bishop E2, short castles, and here my opponent played this move, Knight BD7. So Black is trying to play this move E5 and control the center. It's very difficult to stop this push in reality, but I at least gave it a shot. So I'm developing a piece to F4 while also preventing E5. So if my opponent plays E5, I'm not really completely preventing it, I would say, because after takes, my opponent can technically play this move, Knight H5, attacking the bishop, and then regaining the pawn. But at least I am making his task a little bit more difficult, and it's maybe not so obvious for them to play. So they played this move, Knight E8. They are potentially threatening E5. But here I played Queen D2. So it doesn't look like I'm preventing E5, right? Or am I? Can anyone tell me, am I actually preventing E5? Or did I just allow my opponent to play the move E5? So what would happen if Black goes E5 here? I'm looking at the chat at the same time in person. So it looks like I'm not preventing it because he has 1, 2, 3 defenders, and I have and the pawn itself, and I have 3 attackers. So, but what happens after E5 is I can simply just take. So it's still not so obvious, right? Yeah, in the chat they're saying the queen is undefended, which is exactly the point. Actually, I can take this pawn. And although it looks like Black can take me, he in reality cannot, because his queen is hanging on D8. So I'm basically setting up a small trap, pretending like I'm allowing him to play this move E5 that he was trying to do, but in reality he cannot. So I'm still improving my pieces slowly while they're not doing much. So here they played Queen C7. This time they really want to play E5 because now the queen is no longer hanging on this square. And here I played this move, Bishop G5. So I'm telling them you can actually play e5 if you would like to, but now this would fail to bishop e7, trapping your rook. So I'm making it harder and harder for them to achieve this even very subtle pawn push into the center, and it's already annoying from the very start. And they get knight to f6. This time they want to go e5 again. At this point, it's impossible for me to stop it. So I just calmly improve my pieces. Just bring them into the center and just let them have the e5 push they want. So they prepared it with rook e8. I played rook e1, and they finally played the move e5. So at this point, all my pieces are developed, and I need to sort of come up with a plan. First of all, I can take on an e5. I can stay without doing anything. I can play something like a4 maybe, just to make a move, or I can play the move d5. So this is a very important moment, I would say, in the game of what we should be playing. Do we take on e5? Do we go d5, or do we go a4? So let's try to come up with an idea here. And I think they all have potentially their own advantages. It's probably a matter of choice rather than absolute correctness, but I will definitely be thinking that the move I played is the best move. So, any suggestions? Can be a4. Yeah, a4 is definitely a good move. It's gaining some space and potentially just preventing this move b5, right? It's pretty good. So I think a4 is good. Probably my opponent would, I don't know. I don't know what he would play. Of course, it's been like 14 years. But what's the idea if he takes here?
I would just take with the knight.
With the knight.
I guess I need to guard the pawn.
Yeah, he wants to take here, right?
Yeah.
So if I take with the knight, I have to be careful about this idea, because after he takes, I takes. I mean, I would still argue that we have quite some compensation because his king is open, but I'm down a pawn and my knight is also hanging. So I need to do something urgently. And if I can't really prove what I have, I just lost a pawn for nothing. Yeah. And also, if I take with the queen, however, now look at that. He has a bishop targeting my queen. So in reality, I don't prevent knight e4. So I suddenly ended up in some chaos, which I don't really want to do because, I mean, as playing with the white pieces, we really don't want to end up in a situation like this where I'm down a pawn and I have to sort things out. So that kind of brought me down, yeah.
I would play
d5. So that brings us to d5 and de5, and we have d5 as a suggestion. Why d5 over d takes e5? Okay, so if we keep the tension in the center, maybe we want to go f4 at some point. And also we're actually threatening to simply take, and take on d6, right? So if I were to go d takes e5, d takes e5, I would actually trade the pawns on d4 with the pawn on d6. Essentially, that's what we're doing. Because this pawn left the board, that pawn left the board. They all met on e5. So I don't want to do that because his d6 pawn is actually a potential weakness that I would like to try to take advantage of at some point. There is actually a very common idea to try to trade queens, but whenever you trade queens in these types of positions, although this is definitely better for white, slightly better for white, I would ideally like to keep more pieces on the board because whenever you have more space, you should try to have more pieces on the board. And on the other side, if you have less space, you should try to trade as many pieces as you can, which is from one of the games we saw in the yesterday's stream. So I don't want to do that, although in this position, it kind of looks tough for black to untangle their pieces because there's a pressure on f6. But even in this situation, they can play something like knight h5, try to go f6 to kick this bishop out. They can try to go bishop f8 to kick the rook out, and then start untangling somehow with maybe knight c5, bishop e6. And this is not something I would like to allow. So in this position, I actually did play the move d5. And if my opponent doesn't want to allow the position to open up, so they can play the move c5. And if they take on d5, this is what they would probably face. Takes, takes, takes. And if you take with the queen, now I can try to start putting pressure here by some ideas like bishop to c4. I also have the d6 pawn hanging for free. So there's all sorts of opportunities. I can go rook d2 first, cover up my second rank in the idea of prophylaxis, so I defend this guy and then maybe take on d6. So we got a little bit of everything in this position. Okay, so we're not allowing our opponent to open the center, and we're developing our pieces. So opponent goes here, the move c5. Okay, so now what do we do? How can I improve my position and just try to limit my opponent from doing whatever they want? It's very important. Whenever you are trying to do what you want, this thinking mechanism of prophylaxis, stopping your opponent's play, should always be at the back of your mind. It can be tactically, it can be positionally, it doesn't matter. So if you were playing with the black pieces, how would you try to continue this game? Well, if I was playing black, I know I would try to put pressure with a6, b5, b4, try to put pressure on this knight so that I can win the pawn on e4. Okay, it's kind of easy to figure out. So how about I play something like a4? Now I just prevented my opponent's b5 push probably for the next at least 5-6 moves. Because for them to be able to play b5 successfully, they need to go a6, probably rook b8, and they need a lot more help to try to go b5, because I'm actually guarding it with 3 pieces at this point. So now black is on the back foot. They're completely passive. They need to do something, because it's not easy to just sit and wait and not do anything in chess. So my opponent goes a6. He's getting ready. And this is actually an important position in my opinion. So what would you play with white here? How would you try to improve? Like, it's not just stopping opponents from what they want to do. Like, whenever we see a puzzle, it's kind of easy because they tell us, like, it's white to play and win, black to play and win. And, like, it's very straightforward. But what do you do in a position like this where, optically speaking, all your pieces are doing fantastic, but you're not quite sure how to win? And restricting your opponent to a certain point is great, but it doesn't just win the game. So how do we make progress while limiting our opponent is kind of the idea in this position. What would anyone play with white here? And with what idea, preferably? Okay, we have a rook a1 suggestion. Well, we just played the rook from a1 to d1, and then now we want to go back. What's the idea of rook a1? There's bishop h6 as a suggestion. Yeah. Knight h2 is another suggestion. Okay, and then we want to try to go like f4 stuff. So you want to build an attack on the king side. Okay, that's a pretty good idea too. Only idea I can come up with is move our queenside pawns. Okay, we have some queenside expansion suggestions. So we got multiple ideas in this situation where it's not so clear where we want to put our pieces. We have some knight h2 to g4, maybe generate something on the king side, which I absolutely like. We have bishop h6, trying to go maybe trade the bishops and then do something. And then we got other ideas like try to play b4 at some point. I'm not sure exactly how, but try to figure it out. And then there is an idea of rook a1 being suggested to prevent the idea of b5, although we don't necessarily need it right now. That is definitely something to keep in mind. So here I actually played the move queen e3. The reason I did that is in this pawn structure, the one I'm just highlighting, the idea of putting the knight on c4 is actually a very common one. So knight d2, knight c4 is what my main idea is. So I played queen e3, and at the same time I'm preventing my opponent from still playing the move h6. So they never get any counterplay on the queen side. So they play knight f8. They're trying to move around their pieces. They're trying to go bishop d7, rook b8, and then maybe b5. So that's what they're currently working on, and I played this move knight d2. So how is knight d2 even responding towards c5? Sorry, b5. The idea is that if you play this move, bishop d7, you're trying to do something like that. Well, I don't want to kind of give any spoilers, so I'm not going to reveal the move exactly right now, but there is a nice idea coming up soon to prevent the move b5, although it was kind of suggested before. So here my opponent instead played the knight to d7, trying to do some push, maybe bring the knight. They want to attack me on the king side, bring this knight to f4, so they're kind of trying to develop something on the king side. I just go bishop d3. I prevent him from playing f5 now. So that's also another key idea. In the King's Indian, they always want to go f5, f4, all these attacking ideas, which I don't want to deal with by any means. So I play bishop d3 so that you can never ever play f5. So I'm preventing a lot of things while improving my pieces. So now they go rook to b8 in this position. And actually, it's very smart what they're doing, because if they allowed me, I was going to put my knight on c4, and then I was going to play the move a5 and restrict this b5 push forever, because I would have a takes b6 en passant. So what they did with rook b8 is, if I ever play knight c4, now they can go b5. So my opponent is preventing my play because I cannot allow the pawn to go to b5. This was a classical game, yes. So what do I do now is the very important question, I would say. And this is actually the key moment of the game, which I think the tables turned big time. So this idea was mentioned in the chat before, so it kind of was already said before, but it's quite nice. It's quite a creative idea, and considering I was quite young and finding this idea, I was actually very happy about things. So white to play here. And of course, we need a very concrete idea. Why are we doing what we're doing? Any ideas? Yeah, so what was our idea before? What were we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve him not playing b5. And how were we trying to achieve not allowing opponents? Yeah, the chat is right. And how were we planning to stop this b5 push? Our idea was put the knight on c4 with the idea to play a5. But I can't do that, because after I play this, they get b5 immediately. So I need to support this a5 push somehow. And that's exactly when the move rook a1 comes into play. So my rook was doing absolutely nothing, and for me to be able to play my pawn to a5, I actually have to relocate a centralized rook back to its original place, which is kind of unique, I would say, because not every day you see a move rook on d1 going to a1 in order to play the pawn to a5. And actually, when you look at this with an engine, the engine also supports the move rook a1 with the idea to play a5. So that's kind of what happened in the game. He did play the move b6. He doesn't want me to play a5. I played queen e2, attacking this pawn. Of course, if you ever play the move a5, this position will just collapse instantly with the knight coming to b5. So he cannot do that. Had to play something like rook a8, and now I finally managed to get my knight on c4, which I have been trying to do in the last couple of moves. So we achieved a lot of things in just a few moves. Opponent goes h6, and I just retreat. I do not have any business on that square anymore, so I leave. And here my opponent plays the move g5. So we achieved a lot of things, right? We achieved that my opponent wants to do stuff on the... We stopped everything on the queen side, and now I have to deal with my opponent trying to do some things in the king side. So that's clearly what they're building, and I don't want to get checkmated, so I need to react accordingly towards my opponent's plan. Okay, so what can we do here? How do I stop my opponent's kingside business while creating stuff for myself? the last thing I want him to do is allow him to attack me. So white is better having more space and activity. That's correct. White is definitely better with more space and activity. But how do we utilize that space and activity? Because closed positions are sometimes good for kingside attacks or flank attacks, let's say. So that's what they're trying to do. They want to do something. So one suggestion is g3. But the moment I play g3, I'm kind of weakening this square. Although maybe my opponent can't take advantage of it, I would still be a little bit more hesitant toward playing a move like g3, because now my opponent suddenly gets some chances on this diagonal. So ideally speaking, I would like to do something else, at least in my mind. But what's also a drawback of g5? Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say like queen d2 to try to go knight e2.
Queen d2 to go knight e2. So we are trying to do stuff like that with the idea of what? Why are we bringing the knight?
Maybe knight g3.
And then?
Knight f5.
That's fantastic. So the idea of queen d2 would be try to bring the knight to a weakened square. So that's exactly the answer of what was wrong with g5, is that it completely vacates the f5 square. And now I can try to utilize this square with this knight on c3. But the question is, how do I even do that? First of all, yes, I can do this queen d2 idea, but ideally speaking, I would like to do something a little bit more energetic, because as my opponent just opened up with g5, now their king side is going to be slightly weak. So I actually played this move h4. So the idea is very similar. I am still preventing his knight g6 business, but I also want to just open up his king because he played g5. So we're not just dealing with the positional aspect of things, we're trying to play it also as dynamically as possible, trying to open up his king. So I played queen h5 here. I'm attacking this guy and that guy. If he plays knight g6 or something, I can definitely take here. And if you play knight f6, I can try to hold on to my bishop, and I'll be equalizing the pawns and probably having a good position overall. So my opponent played knight f6. I took. They played knight g6, attacking my queen. I go here. I attack. I go back, and then they go here. Okay, so it's white to play now. What would white play here? We did some shuffling back and forth, but we got the position somewhat under control, but we need to figure out a move now. What would you play with white? This is another, I would say, not so complicated move. So Raymond is suggesting f3, and Alex is suggesting bishop h6. So we got two suggestions here. One of them is right, the other one is wrong. Who's going to tell me why one of them is right and the other one is wrong? Yeah? Anyone?
Bishop takes h6 and black just go knight g4.
If bishop takes h6, black can just go knight g4. So which one is the right move then?
f3.
f3. So what's the idea of f3?
To prevent your opponent from going knight g4.
Exactly. So we're tactically blocking this knight g4 idea. We're strengthening our pawn structure too. We're using tactics, and now we're threatening this pawn. So here my opponent played h5. I played bishop to g5. And here my opponent played bishop d7. Okay, so we got some opportunities here. And here I decided to go a5. I tried to just make some progress on the other flank too. Couple of trades. I'll just go a little fast on this one. Rook a1. I'm attacking the pawn on a6. My opponent defends. All right. So now this is also an important moment, I would say. It is white to play. What would you do with white? So it's very possible to get greedy by taking here. But I don't think greed is good, because we suddenly gave up the pair of bishops, And I feel like this might benefit my opponent. They can try to go something like king g7, try to get this bishop out, bring the rook in, go knight f4, or maybe bring the bishop here. I'm not sure. And they would try to get some counterplay. And in reality, I don't really want them to get any counterplay by just going for one pawn. So these types of situations, I usually try not to take on f6 or give up the pair of bishops just for the sake of getting a pawn, because our advantage is actually way bigger than just winning a pawn. So here I played something that I honestly think is very underestimated. I played this move b3. And the reason this move is underestimated is it looks like I'm just doing nothing. But in reality, I'm just being super patient with my position. I am absolutely in no rush to try to win the game. I'm just moving my pieces and improving them. And I'm just slowly making sure my opponent never ever gets any counterplay on any square. So instead of my pawn being loose on b2, I actually make sure that it's guarded by a pawn on c2 that is guarded by a bishop. So everyone is like defending each other, which allows this knight to be actually free at this point. So now if I feel like moving this knight, I can actually freely move it to try to maybe go to f5, and I don't have to worry about a pawn hanging on b2 out of nowhere. So this is kind of underestimated play, because moves like this, they seem like they're very simple and harmless, but actually they're very effective as they restrict your opponent more and more, because they have no space in this situation. My opponent played bishop b7, and as we earlier talked about, this f5 square is weak. So I can definitely route one of my knights onto that square. But the question is, which knight do I take to f5? Do I move the knight on c4 or do I move the knight on c3? Which one is the right knight to take to f5? Any preference?
I'd say c3.
c3, right. Because the knight on c4 is actually doing great, right? It's putting pressure here, but the knight on c3 isn't doing much. So we go knight e2 with the idea to go here, and plus I might actually win this pawn too while I'm traveling to f5. So my opponent actually tried to run away, and then they actually had to go back because the knight on f5 would be way too powerful. And now I simply grab the pawn. So in reality, I did end up winning that pawn on h5, but I didn't have to give up my dark squared bishop for the knight just yet. And here my opponent plays knight e5, knight f4, sorry. He's threatening my queen, also my bishop. And if I move the queen somewhere, he's probably going to take my bishop and take on b3. So I don't really want to deal with any of that. So I take the knight, and we get into a position like this. So it's white to play. What do we do? He's attacking our rook. We can move the rook, but we have to be careful with where we move the rook. We shouldn't be moving it to somewhere that's not great. One bad example would be, although this probably still wins, is an example like this, which would be sad. But probably my position is still good because his pieces are just not doing anything. So I think I would still be able to win this position, even in a situation like this. Plus I have some activity there, which we're probably not thinking about at the moment. But there is no need. Here I just played rook d1, not blundering anything. e5 would have also been interesting, and I just played e5 on the next move. So now I have all sorts of active pieces on the board. Yeah, I could have played e5 on the previous go. I just preferred it like this, to have this rook also maybe doing something. My opponent took this guy, and then I played d6. So now I'm further pushing him to the back foot, and then it's time to kind of wrap it up. I took this pawn, and it's funny about this rook, the journey actually began with rook d1, and then I went back to a1, went to a5, went to c5, and the journey will still continue. My opponent played this, rook went to c7, I'm actually further going in with the rook, and then he goes rook c8, And then anyone wants to guess the move? It's probably easy, yeah?
Knight b6.
Knight b6. Knight b6, but then I can take the rook.
And then d takes c7.
And then d takes c7. Your idea is perfect. If I take here, you take there. But we always have to be alert for tactics. They're always in the air. They're hiding. So we shouldn't be rushing the winning ideas here. So another guess maybe? That was a nice idea though. So the rook went there, and then went there, went here, went there, went there. How about we go further? Played rook e7. Just to the heart of the position, just bringing my rook from a1 to e7, just like that, just moving around. My opponent played rook c5. I just want to trade the bishops. That's a bluff, of course. The moment you take here, it's going to be mate on f7. So he played e4, trying to create some counterplay. I just take. It's a free pawn. Goes queen c8, and I play e5. So he still can't take it. The bishop is poisoned because there's mate. And my opponent sacrificed some pieces. They're trying to do some stuff, but they're not going to get out of it. All right, queen takes e5. It's not so easy, actually. Suddenly, there's a chaos on the board, and maybe I'm not winning. Maybe. Of course I am, but you never know. So it's white to play. How do I get rid of this mess? My opponent is threatening queen takes f5. How do I tactically avoid losing a bishop? How do I prevent that queen f5 idea? We need to use our tactical senses to prevent. Well, I see this guy is hanging. Yeah.
Queen f3.
Perfect. Queen f3. So now I'm utilizing that. He goes there, I take, he takes, and then we play a couple moves. And eventually I promote this pawn. Actually, I think he got checkmated. Let me see. Yeah, he did get checkmated. Yeah, and then mate. So this was one example. This was a bit on the sophisticated end. It's not like too simple, but opponent couldn't do anything. There was zero threats towards my king. I don't remember him ever giving me a check. It was just a very simple play. Okay, so that was good. But let's see another example where I think I messed up everything in the opening, and then I was completely losing, and then I somehow managed to get out of it. But we're gonna see why and how. All right, so I'm playing with the white pieces. I played the London because I always play the London when I don't know what to do. So my opponent goes d5, I go e3. This is the Jabava London, so it's not a... he could give some check though before getting mated. He could have given a check, yeah, he could have. So, and then I played h4. So this is my line I like to, like, not my line, of course. It's a line I like to play for a win, and it's a lot of fun. The main idea, just to show it, is if black castles here, we go h5, and if knight h5, I like to sacrifice here. And there's a ton of theory, but this is a lot of fun, and I like playing chess like this. If you know how I play, this is the way I play at this point in my life. My opponent goes c5, I go knight b5, I'm threatening fork on c7, he has to react, and then I just start developing my pieces. So everything looks normal, right? There's nothing too bad, and I'm like, okay, I want to go h5 so bad that I'm not even like castling or anything. So, and my opponent is like, okay, I don't see your ideas, I'm just gonna go win your pawn. Very simple. To me, I thought this was gonna be a very straightforward win, because in my understanding, if I have a huge attack happening, I thought this should be like nothing to discuss. So I just played g4. I'm like going all in. And okay, so he just plays knight d7. I'm like, okay, I mean the knight on f6 just left the square, so the attack should be much more easier, and I play this move g5. I'm a little bit careless, I would say. I'm just pushing my kingside pawns, but I don't really have a true follow-up behind what I'm doing. So he goes knight e5, I take, and then he goes knight c7. So his idea is to kind of defend everything with this move knight e6. So therefore I played bishop g4. I'm preventing him from going to with knight e6. So, but he still goes. It's not like I truly stopped him. And then I take on g6, he takes there. And I evaluate. I'm like, if I take here, he just takes back. And if I try to go something like queen g4, well, he's never ever going to allow me to do anything. And if I even get a check on h7, well, that's not going to help me achieve anything. So my idea was, okay, let me at least try to do something on d5 square, potentially castle long, maybe do something on d5, maybe double up on the h file, try to get something going, right? So he goes queen b6. He's attacking my pawn on b2. I play queen h3. I'm threatening some mate, so it looks quite scary. How should black prevent this? Well, he just moves the rook. Simple enough. And then I castle long. Okay, that kind of looks tempting too. And then my opponent goes knight there. Okay, so white to play. How do we even try to go forward here? What's something I can try to even create in this situation? I mean, it doesn't look like I have a real attack happening. And where is even prophylaxis going to come into play? So e6 is a suggestion, but if I play e6, so this guy is hanging. This would not be good. I don't want that. Because if I go there, let's see if there's a mate here. Let's try to figure it out. Well, at least there is this, right? Then you go here. Okay. Looks like you're still alive somehow. You're still not mated. Takes. You're still not mated, but also you might be mated very soon, yeah? He takes f7. Let me slide the king. Scary. It's very scary for both sides. But the game is still on, and I'm threatening mate right now. Oh, no, definitely not that. That was a slip. But I don't see. I think e6 is dangerous. I like the idea, though, but I think it's dangerous. What else? Anyways, I just played the move rook h2. Just why not? All right, the main question is actually the black to play. So that's the main question. What would you do here with black? This is where the prophylaxis and dynamics come into play. Now that I look at it, it's very easy. I actually thought it was super easy in the game too, and believe it or not, if my opponent played a couple correct moves, I was ready to resign because I just gave up all my pieces with white, and I'm about to get checkmated too. My king is weak. Not only his king is in danger, my king is in danger. So knight a4 is the suggestion. So they want to attack the pawn on b2. And I'll give you a hint. Yeah, the other Alex says, I think black should attack. So everyone is saying black should attack. Well, rook a c8 would kind of be unfortunate because I have a bishop there, right? So that wouldn't really help. So everyone is like, okay, I think black should attack, knight a4, rook c8, do something on the king side. Yeah?
I'm not sure if black should play e6 to give the king some escape square.
So e6 is another suggestion, to give black's king to some escape square. Okay. Okay. e6. So why e6? You want to run away with the king, but what's the danger? What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of anything specific, or is just the just in case? Yeah.
I think
And then?
Queen H8.
Exactly. And that would just end the game, right? So here my opponent, just like the chat, they were like, okay, I'm just going to go knight a4, I'm going to attack the b2 pawn, and then they lost the game very quickly. But instead, if they played the move e6, I have nothing left in the position. Because I would have played something like this, and next move, what would you play here? King f8. And now the king escapes. So just because the move e6 is no longer attacking, it doesn't mean it's actually not useful. So moves like this, very, very undervalued. e6 was just enough for black to win the game. Because after they played knight a4, I did play this. Just to get an idea, a5 was also suggested, but I would like to show what white's idea is. I was going to play rook h1, and if you continue doing something, I'm actually threatening queen h8 check, sacrificing my queen, and then rook h7 checkmate. So that's my idea. And therefore, black actually had to play e6 with the idea to run away. And how can you do that? Well, you have to first ask yourself, what does my opponent want? If my opponent saw my rook h1, queen h8 idea, they would have absolutely played this, and then they would have won the game in almost no time. But because they hurried up and they played knight a4, they completely overlooked my rook h1 idea because they believed that their attack is stronger than my attack, but unfortunately it's not. They played f5, I took on f6, en passant. They took here, okay, now what? How do we win the game with white? This is not too difficult. Should be fairly easy.
Just the same mate.
Yeah, same mate. But what happens if he goes here?
Sack the queen, I think.
Sack the queen, takes, rook check, and then?
Oh, no. Yeah, you just rook to 7.
Yeah, it's the power of the bishops, right? I prevent everything, and that's mate. So this was another nice one. All right, so I want to do one specific position from a very recent game I played. I played this game in the 2022 Olympiad in Chennai against Polish Grandmaster, Moranda. He's 2636 rated. And I'll just go to the key moment, I would say. I'm going to go fast forward all the way. It's like another crazy game with me attacking on the king side. I'm kind of going to skip the theory part of it. Maybe I'll show it in a different day. But it's a lot of craziness happening in this game. And here my opponent played rook h8. So I would like to stop at this moment and then try to guess it, try to find the move here with the white pieces. And this is essentially the dynamics and prophylaxis. So I would say this is where you kind of get the fruits of like your training, is in the moments like this. Playing in the Olympiad, representing my country, and position is somewhat equal, I would say, roughly equal, maybe slightly favoring the black pieces. But it's a very tough position, I would say. So black just played rook h8, and we kind of have to figure out how can we do something about it. So the floor is the chat's and everyone else's. It's white to play. It's a fairly complicated position, I would say, because it's very rare that you get these like weird tripled pawns in the middle. One very quick question is in the chat, why not take the bishop? Well, the problem is if I take the bishop, they're going to capture my rook first, and after I capture the rook, they're going to take this bishop, and I can't touch that pawn due to the pin. And after they go f5, I'm actually not very happy, because then they get a lot of pawns, two connected passers. not even sure if this is 2 or 3 because they have another one in the back. So that's quite annoying, and I really don't want to deal with this pin, because if I even try to do something like this with the idea of taking the pawn, they actually can reinforce these pawns and potentially trade the queens or bring the knight in. It just looks very bad. So we cannot capture the bishop. All right, one suggestion is b4. All right, so what's the idea of b4? That's an interesting move. So what does b4 do? I guess b4 is preventing the move c5, right? That's kind of the idea, I would say, which is conceptually, I would say very deep, but it looks like a good move. Okay, what else? I guess the main question to ask is, if you were playing with the black pieces now, if it was your move, what would you play? Yeah. So if you were black, you would play queen f4. Right. And if I take? Knight takes. Okay, and then you have a pin here, right? Very good. And how would white try to deal with that? Where king b1? King b1 now? Or after knight f4? Okay, so suggestion is king b1 now. And how does king b1 prevent queen f4?
It's not a check, so we might be able to like defend somehow. Maybe with like queen g2.
Queen g2. Okay, so if I go queen g2, can I do that? Maybe. It's not even clear. I can also take. Rook takes. It's possible, I guess. Do I have anything else? So king b1 now is also in the chat. So I think that's a preferred move, which I think is an interesting move. Any suggestions for black here? What do we do here, actually? Let's quickly answer that. I mean, I can definitely go rook g4. Oh, rook e8 is another suggestion, which I actually like. This also looks very tempting. But what happens if I take? Is there mate? I don't see if there's mate. Takes, takes, check. Here. It's chaos on board again. I don't think there's mate here. Yeah. Probably there is no mate here. So let's not go in there. Although, one second. There's check here. Because you can't block with the queen. There's queen takes g4. You can't go there, it's mate. So you have to go on a journey. You go on a journey, but there's no way you're going to escape this. Actually. So that's a mate idea, but the king can run away, right? So how about I do something like this? I wasn't expecting this chaos, but then there's maybe d5, preventing this, attacking that. This is not what I was thinking from this game. Queen f5 was also a check. Yeah, this game is a chaos. Maybe this is good, but that looks very messy. Too messy for my taste. And also, we couldn't really address the question knight h4. Because if I go rook g4, f g4, queen g4, I'm still down a pawn, right? And he can retreat to defend. Messi is good. He's good. Okay, so that didn't quite solve my problems. King b1. But what else can we do here? Why is king b1 even a prophylaxis move? It stops queen f4 check, but it's not really stopping the idea of queen f4, right? So bishop f1 is being suggested. I'm going to guess that you're suggesting bishop f1 here. But bishop f4, bishop f1 also, it actually loses a piece immediately. Check and then takes. So this would lose pretty much on the spot, unfortunately. It doesn't work. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty tough position. I did end up playing king b1, but we need to understand why. So why is this king b1 so strong? Queen f4, and I'll show the answer. It's actually a little unexpected how this king b1 plays a role. It looks like the idea was to get out of check, but the question is which check? Well, this is how the game went. I take on g4, my opponent took here, I took on here with check, they played king f8, and then I played bishop d7. Who is going to tell me what would have happened if my king was on c1? Yeah. Knight e2. So if my king was here, knight e2 would have forked my king and the rook. And therefore, after seeing that in advance, I played my king to b1, sort of setting a trap to get to this position, because now I can take on c6 or b5, whatever he gives, or c5. And this actually helped me to collect some pawns. One question in chat, did you have bishop f3? Well, I potentially did have bishop f3, but I saw that I can win this pawn and that pawn. So I was like, might as well collect everything instead of collecting one thing. So I played king b1, and then I'll just show the rest of the game really quickly. I played this, king there. I took on c6. He played here. I played a4, kind of getting myself two passers in the center. Opponent played knight e6. They really want to push the f-pawn down the board. I pin him. I'm threatening to go d5. They go king d6. They want to go f5. So what do? I play rook f3. I prevent them from playing f5. They go king e7, and then now I finally bring my rook into the action. I want to win this pawn. They try to go and create some counterplay, but I eventually gang up on this pawn there, and I just push the pawn. d5 and d6, and that's it. And that's resigns, because after that, okay, what's the easiest way to win in this position? It's quite simple, I would say, yeah? d7. And if king takes, of course, you just take here and then take the knight. And if king e7, rook d6, king d8. Rook c8, absolutely. And if here, good job. And then that's what win the game. So my opponent resigned, I think, here. And that was it. But the most critical moment of this game is king b1. I'm not saying that king b1 wins the game by any means. Don't get me wrong. The position is still super unclear, but the idea is to actually prevent my opponent's queen f4. I think he should have played the move c5, which I don't truly remember what my response was going to be. It's been a couple of months at this point. Probably I didn't have the smartest response in mind at that point, but I would have figured something out. Maybe I just go a3 or something. Try to just live, basically. But I think c5 was the best move. Of course I can't take because there's queen d1 mate. But at least I dodged the queen f4 bullet by preventing them from playing knight e2 all the way at the end of the line. And yeah, this bishop is also guarding the h1 square if needed, and so on. Question on the chat, what was your highest rating opponent beaten? 2670, I think. I think 2670. That should be. It was a Russian Grandmaster in our Kiev. I've shown that game also in one of the previous Grandmaster Choice lectures in December. So yeah, this was the last game I had in mind. King b1 was definitely not easy. We're probably going to be doing a lot of, in the Grandmaster's Choice, a lot of dynamics, tactics, prophylaxis, and so on. So my style of chess is avoiding my opponent's play a lot while I'm attacking them. So I have a lot of attacking games. This was kind of like a warm-up introductory session to the topic. We're going to be seeing a lot more in the future. And final question in chat: how do you think tournament players should approach the opening? It's kind of, there is a lot of openings to learn, so I guess you can pick them up by playing. If you can study them, there's a lot of approaches you can take, so I don't think there's one concrete approach in terms of opening. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I guess I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.